Welcome, everyone, to the Activate Miracles podcast, a podcast where we are privileged to meet with our guests frequently and learn from them what it means to activate miracles in their own lives and how miracles show up for them. And really grateful to have Bill with us today. And as our guest, excited to learn from him how his spiritual journey has led him to us at this point. So, Bill, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
Feel free to introduce yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. So my name is Bill Belanger. I'm a former psychotherapist. I own the online mental health company Healbright, and I also work as a coach for founders and CEOs through my company Integrated Mind Training. So very happy to be here.
Oh, so fantastic. And we connected a couple of months ago, and I was really connected and inspired to hear your story of how you were able to take psychotherapy and then, create the company that you created, and also your willingness to be of service to CEOs of companies and help them be aligned with who they are so that they can lead their lives and their teams, which is very much aligned with what we do at the Miracle Activation Center as well. So grateful to have you also as a collaborator for Miracle Activation Center, and one that we can refer people to who may be needing help. So we're going to go ahead and dive right in, Bill, if it's okay.
Yeah.
I shared with you a Course in Miracles principle. It's principle number 9. So I'm just going to read it and then ask you to share how you connect with it, what if anything, it means to you and how you see that play out in your life. So miracles are a kind of exchange. Like all expressions of love, which are always miraculous in the true sense, the exchange reverses the physical laws. They bring more love both to the giver and the receiver. So as you kind of sit with that, what comes to you? Does that mean anything to you? How have you experienced that in your own life?
Yeah, I think what it brings up for me is some of the Buddhist ideas of compassion, and in particular, a meditation practice called Tonglen. So Tonglen is translated from Tibetan as the giving and receiving meditation, or sometimes exchanging self for other. So it's an interesting practice in the sense of I think the miracle is when you start to drop your own self-interest and focus on the well-being of others, it's actually beneficial to you as well. So I know the Dalai Lama has said that he believes if you're going to be selfish, you should at least be intelligently selfish or have wise selfishness. And so their position would be that the intelligent way to be selfish is to take care of other people because it actually makes you feel better. So I can dive into what that practice is like, but just to give context on how I learned it. So this is when, after I graduated college, I was traveling through Asia, and I did a month-long retreat in Nepal at a monastery called Kopan Monastery. So it's a traditional Tibetan Buddhist monastery. So during the month, we'd spend lots of time doing meditations, we'd have lectures, we'd have groups where we talked about some of the concepts. And so we started to learn about this concept of, focusing on the well-being of others as a way for you to be happy. And it's a silly example, but it was something kind of clicked with me when I was there with chocolate. So in a lot of these Buddhist monasteries, the only vice that's allowed is sugar and candy. So everybody's always eating candy, and it's, the kind of the one thing people can have that isn't super healthy during the week. So it's just an interesting thing that I noticed after going to so many of these teachings was that I habitually, if I would have a piece of candy and break it off and share it with somebody, my instinct was to take the bigger piece for myself. So that's kind of how I grew up. And I had been trained that, I need to look out for myself. If I want to be happy, I need the bigger piece. I need to take care of myself. And that's what will make me feel good. But just noticing that shift during the retreat where I started experimenting with those little moments of, let me focus on the other person first and see how that feels. And again, it's maybe a small, silly example, but it's kind of a profound realization. It actually feels better to give somebody the bigger piece. It makes me feel better, and it's better for them as well. So that's kind of an embodiment of what that Tonglen practice is. But to get into the specifics of the practice, you begin, doing a breath meditation, sitting, and essentially what you're doing is you're visualizing, you're opening up your heart, and you're absorbing the pain and suffering from other people on the in-breath, and on the out-breath, you're sending them love and compassion. So it's interesting because I think from the Western perspective, we're usually taught that when you're visualizing something, you visualize it for yourself. So you
Mm-hmm.
visualize yourself manifesting things that you want, or being successful or achieving. So a lot of times when I've been in meditation communities where they learn this practice, people are a little uncomfortable in the beginning, or they think that if they are visualizing taking on other people's pain, it will hurt them, or maybe they'll get cancer or get sick. But it's actually the opposite. So what ends up happening is you're breathing in the suffering and the pain of other people and sending them out your love, and your heart just begins to really open, and
Mm.
something shifts. So I think that's the miracle, that our instinct on some level is, if we want we want happiness, we want to be selfish, we need to look out for ourselves. But there's something that shifts when we're dropping that obsession with the self and that more narrow-minded thinking and focusing on the well-being of others, that's kind of where things start to open up. So that's what that quote means to me.
That's fantastic. I want to dive a little more deeply into how you help executives, entrepreneurs, CEOs of companies in bringing in mindfulness, potentially meditation practices. I'm meeting more and more CEOs who are very drawn to exploring it because the traditions of how we've done business and acquired and managed and led is a system that probably didn't work very well all along. We probably were being a little self-deceptive, but for sure, it's not working now. And
Mm.
especially coming out of COVID, people are in a different place. So maybe share a little bit more about how you found meditation and mindfulness to be helpful in your path, and how
Mm.
you help CEOs and executives in connect and further their lives. Not just, I love how you talk about this isn't about acquisition. This isn't about
Hmm.
what I can gain. The universe being my Santa Claus as an example, right?
Yeah.
So maybe you can share a little bit more about that, if you would, please, whatever comes to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing is, another concept here is this idea, the Buddhist idea of self. And so their idea is that the self is ultimately empty, that the way that we think about things is a little bit mistaken. So we tend to think that we're a solid, real person and that we're different than everybody else and we're unique in some certain way that nobody else is. There's other Buddhist meditations that try to allow us to see through that and see that things are actually more interconnected, and that there's a bigger reality that we're often unaware of. So, a simple language in Buddhism for that would be Buddha nature. I think there's parallels, whether you're saying it's a higher power, or God, or the Tao and Taoism. But I think the point is to try to find practices to tap into that and to really get out of your own way.
Mm.
So, in terms of how that manifests for me in working with clients, the first step for me is to try to bring that state of mind as much as possible into the actual coaching session. So, an example of how that can be helpful is that sometimes I will have a really a narrow idea of what a client needs. But in some ways, it's coming from from myself, and this narrow way of thinking. And maybe it's because I'm doing a new training and I really want to use it with this person. But it's a discipline in the moment to allow that part of me to come up and to listen to it, but to try to surrender and just be open to the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And what I find is when I'm open to the moment and whatever is arising, usually the thing that is going to be most helpful for the client will come up automatically.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really more of tuning into my own Buddha nature through my own meditation practice, and then also allowing the client to tune into that as well. And then ultimately, there's no distinction between it's really not correct to say my Buddha nature, the client's Buddha nature. It's just that shared Buddha nature, that shared spirit, and just allowing both of us to be in that space, and whatever needs to unfold will ultimately unfold.
Mm-hmm.
So whatever the specific intervention is a little bit less important. It's more about being in that space. And sometimes my clients, they would like to learn meditation, and we go there and they'll learn meditations, and sometimes not.
Mm-hmm.
So it really is for me more about trusting whatever's happening in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
that will be what's best for the client.
It's interesting. I look back over my own experience, and when I left corporate America and really consulting and coaching found me, it's not something I woke up one morning and designed for myself. I guess on some level I did. Otherwise, I wouldn't have done it for the last 20 years. But at the same time, I was quite surprised. And I was actually in it for 6 years before I realized, oh, this is my calling. This is this is my job. And I look back without, a lot of self-criticism about how much time when I would be with a client, with my mind wandering over in my toolbox, which tool am I going to use? So I really wasn't present in the same way. And what a relief it was for me, and actually how much easier it was when I could know, okay, I've done the certifications, those are on the shelf, I have the certificates, that's all well and good. But the most important thing I can do right now is be present and trust that what you need, you'll communicate, and together there may be a tool, and it may just be being present and allowing a space in a container for that client to do their work and fully self-explore.
Yeah, and I think it's a balance between having the right tools and trusting in the moment. So I kind of visualize that as a tightrope, tight wire walk. So you're kind of always balancing between both. So obviously on one extreme, I've seen new therapists that they just learn CBT and they have the CBT workbook and they're really rigid about that. That can be unhelpful. But on the other extreme, if somebody has no training, no tools, it might be a little bit naive that they have the ability to help somebody. So I think it's just, again, I think each session is different, each client is different, and just trying to intuitively walk that tightrope.
Mm-hmm. And for me, my trainings and certifications, as much as learning a tool that I can use when the time is appropriate, it was also about my own healing. And as I learned and I went through those, different studies, whether when I was in college and ongoing training, it was for me to connect, for me to do my healing and to learn. So this has been a really rich time. The time has flown, but I want to ask you before we leave our audience, we invite people to come because we believe that they have something really valuable to share with our audience. So as you connect in this present moment, what would you like to share with our audience about miracles and how they can, our audience can bring those more into their lives?
Yeah, I guess to keep it simple, what's coming up for me is to just get out of your own way. I think it's kind of that simple. I think there's a lot of different ways to do that. It's something that it's a theme that's in my life right now, this difference between trusting and letting things happen and having a more small self that is trying to overthink and control things. I guess what miracle means to me is, I think of synchronicity. I think of things that are happening from a higher intelligence. And I think in order to let that happen, you need to have trust and let it happen and get it out of the way.
Right. I often have clients ask me, well, if I really am going to live in this place of trust and in the moment where I don't make plans of my own smaller self, but I trust the universal consciousness, God, source, whatever we want to identify, that I'll be shown what to do. I had the epiphany. It's not that brilliant, but for me, it was a big epiphany and if there is a plan I'm meant to make or a project I'm meant to take on, in that by being present, I'll be guided. Okay, the next step is for you to take on a project and I'll walk with you every step of the way to do it. So of course we can make a plan with higher source. There might be a project. And so for the next month or 6 months or whatever it is, I may wake up every morning and be committed to that project. So can maybe bring some comfort to people who like to be planners, that if a plan, one will come, right?
That's a good point too. And in Buddhism, there's this idea of a distinction between ultimate truth and relative truth, and that you need to balance those. So I think some people get confused. Okay, I never have to plan and everything will happen. So I have a trip coming up to Denver in a few weeks. So of course we have to book the flights. I have to set my alarm clock. I have to make a itinerary of what we'll do when we're there. So it's not negating that. But it's balancing that with being attuned to the moment, and maybe something will shift, or maybe a plan won't be relevant when the time comes, and just not holding that super rigidly. So actually, in some sense, that reminds me, I think travel is a really good metaphor on how to balance these things as well. So if you're traveling somewhere, of course, you have to plan, and it's good to have, maybe go on a tour, you have some different things you'll do. But I also think you can balance that with getting lost and being spontaneous and having unexpected encounters.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I'm glad you brought that up. I do think the balance is key. So it isn't getting rid of the rational mind or fighting the rational mind or planning. It's just not letting that part of you control everything, essentially.
And staying flexible, planned flexibility as well, right?
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, to be in the moment. So, Bill, how can our listeners get in touch with you? What's the best way? In addition, that you're on our Miracle Activation website, miracleactivationcenter.com. You're one of our team members. We're so grateful to have you as a team member. They can learn more about you there. But what's another way in case they want to reach out in another way to connect with you?
Yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn, so just Bill Belanger, or just email me directly. So my email is bill@integratedmindtraining.com. And so very happy to hear from people.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Bill. And thank you to our guests for listening in today. We really do believe that the universal connectedness can help us to bring miracles into our lives. And we really do believe that you are the miracle activator. We look forward to being with you again soon.
Thank you.